Okay.
All right, I'm here with Sam. So I know that you're running a think tank called Olam Research,
That's true. That's correct.
and can you tell me about where you're based and what kind of work you're doing with Olam?
I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the deep south of the Americas, of the Western Hemisphere. And Olam Research is about democracy, the rule of law, inclusion, and human rights. So we are trying to put everything together, classify countries into different groups, different categories, so we can find out what they really need in terms of democracy, rule of law, and freedom, and then figure out how to further all these elements of liberal democracy, free markets, and there's peace in state and inclusion and many other things.
When you talk about democracies, how do you categorize? How do you catalog them?
Well, of course, there's liberal democracy and there's illiberal democracy, which I prefer to call nominal democracies because they are democracies by name. You get some of the countries with the worst human rights records calling themselves democratic.
Hmm.
They often start their names with democratic XYZ and they keep going.
Sure.
So we categorize them broadly into liberal democracies and illiberal democracies. We focus on liberal democracies, and now we classify liberal democracies into three. That's the constitutional, advanced democracies, and democracy startups.
Hmm.
Yes.
Can you give some examples?
Um, this is from the Cold War era. This is an improvement of skills from the Cold War era, because everybody knows that during the Cold War we had three types of countries: First World, Second World, Third World, right? The world has changed so much since 1991. So we are building on a model of democracy by Samuel Huntington, the three waves of democracy. So he classified democracies into three: one from the 1800s, another from the early 1900s, and the third wave democracies. These are democracies that consolidated their statecraft structures towards the end of the Cold War. But Samuel Huntington died a few years ago, and his models are also a bit outdated now. So our three categories try to include elements like the maturity of states, the sophistication of democratic institutions, and several other pointers. So we classify constitutional democracies as those that commenced building liberal democratic structures in the early 1900s, and survived through the Cold War, usually often on the side of the West. So here examples are South American countries, Taiwan, and countries with more sophisticated democratic arrangements like probably Australia, South Africa, and several others. They are constitutional, and they might be middle way between the advanced democracies. Advanced democracies, these are democracies that have civil liberties, liberal structures in the 1800s. So here we're talking of Western Europe, Japan, the United States, and Canada, and several other countries. And after that, there is the controversial bit. That's the third side, the democracy startups, the post-Cold War democracy startups. So these are countries that mainly built their democratic structures after the end of the Cold War. That's after 1991. So here we're talking of countries in Africa, the Caribbean, some countries in the Indian subcontinent, and other parts of Eastern Europe. So these are the three: advanced, constitutional, and third wave democracy startups.
And the third wave democracy startups, they're defined based on the time that they came into existence. But how do they fit in terms of liberal versus illiberal democracies?
That's a good question. That's a very, very, very good one. So third wave democracies are often they are new, and because they are new, they are more fragile, but they are making the effort. they are trying to move onto the path of liberal democracy. And there are also nations that would be called startup nations after the Cold War, but they have expressly decided to be illiberal. So the illiberal examples in the third wave democracies would be probably Zimbabwe and Cuba, because they made it clear after the Cold War that they're going to stay, and probably Vietnam as well, because they are openly driven by what we'll call illiberal democracies. Yes, but then you have everybody else trying to move towards an American model of democracy based on human rights, rule of law, civil liberties, and the rest. But quite frankly, it's difficult to differentiate in practice because making the effort is not always good enough. And many of them appear to be illiberal autocracies. But for the sake of promoting democracy, they have to be classified as such. And in my opinion, supported to build stronger democracies.
Is it have there been any instances in which countries have moved from liberal to illiberal or illiberal to liberal democracies?
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. And in such classifications, you need a dose of optimism and and realism. You need to balance the two. But of course, the threat of democracy backsliding is real. It happens to everybody. It happens to everybody. Even the advanced democracies are now struggling with populism.
Hmm.
So we know of the United States and its struggles now in a post-truth democratic situation where institutions are being overpowered and eroded. So yes, it's obvious it happens all the time in the democracy startups, the third wave democracy startups.
And are there ways to resist or prevent or fight back against these slides?
Yes, of course. You need a dose of research to find out what is most appropriate. The status quo now is to try to, bribe countries out of out of these backsliding. Some of the weaker democracies are being bribed out of it. The United States often relies on the
Hmm.
opposition in these countries to, restore their democracies and all that. But of course, that's also open to collision. So there is an ongoing challenge, and the solution is to conduct more research, understand the realities on the ground, and build more lasting systems that can support liberal consensus building that will advance these struggling and fragile democracies.
Isn't there also the threat that, well, let's call them third wave democracies, whether liberal or illiberal, are often used as proxies by global powers. So sometimes they'll
Oh,
push them to either, move from liberal to illiberal or even from illiberal to liberal in order to help the larger power, the
oh
imperialist
yes,
power, to
oh yes,
protect its own
that's
interests.
that's real politics. That's real politics. It's all over the place, and you have the Russia coming into like disrupt many democracies in the Sahel region of Africa and all that. And then there's obviously China, which has been criticized for being passive. They just throw in aid
Hmm.
without in a non-judgmental manner. But of course, the outcomes are often the creation of autocracies. Because
Hmm.
some of the worst autocracies were supported by China for many years. Talking of Syria, Sudan, Cambodia, and many others. So yes, in the contemporary sense, uh, superpower politics is significant, but ultimately, democracy and its construction is the goal. It has been shown to work all over the world and it's superior. So most countries are moving towards it, with or without the support of the advanced democracies.
Aren't there even instances in which liberal democracies, like the United States in past periods, would support illiberal democracies and prevent them from becoming liberal democracies through means of financial aid and military support, simply to protect their corporate interests in the regions?
Oh, yes, that's also another good question, another good point. That was why it became necessary to draw the line between the Cold War era and the post-Cold War era. Because during the Cold War, there were autocracies everywhere. In what I mean, most of what we call constitutional democracies, that's the middleway democracies today, Latin America, South Africa, Taiwan, they all have their authoritarian systems that the United States openly supported. But based on the circumstances then during the Cold War, it was simply the only way out, the only way out. But after the Cold War, yes, America can be held accountable for supporting regimes that are problematic. And that is part of our interest, part of our effort to promote true liberal democracy around the world. It requires research and proactive monitoring.
Yeah, and aside from the fact that supporting or imposing liberal or illiberal democracies from the outside can be problematic in terms of military alliances and suppression or repression of movements. It takes away the right to self-determination of the people within the country.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. With our research done in the first quarter of this year, what we've observed is that most countries are regressing to presidentialism, most especially fragile democracies. But of course, we also know that the most advanced democracies also reverting back to presidentialism as well. It's an open secret. But in the fragile democracies, it's more serious. It has more serious consequences. So this creates a gap which prevents the spread of democracy, self-determination, and the quest towards true, the true adherence to democracy as it should be.
When you say they're regressing back to presidentialism,
Presidential, yes.
from what?
From separation of powers and the vital institutions for democracy. Everybody knows, we all know that democracy uh, should be about splitting powers between three arms. The Chinese talk of five arms. Between three arms, that's the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So we get presidentialism, which makes the executive too big to control and too big to contain, thereby overshadowing the legislature and the judiciary.
I'm familiar with the three arms, but what are the five arms?
Well, the Chinese have two monitoring arms that come to monitor the executive and the legislature, and then a third arm that is responsible for auditing. The Taiwanese have been able to, institutionalize that and operationalize it so beautifully. So part of our research focuses on uh, sharing this aspect of the Chinese democracy, liberal democracy advancements to the rest of the. It's so interesting, and it could be the solution to many problems of democracy in fragile states and emerging liberal democracies.
Are there liberal democracies that exist with two arms?
That's an interesting question. In theory, well, yes, there might be some. There might be some like
Parliamentary
that.
systems that have a legislature and a judiciary, but not a separate executive?
Usually, not a functional judiciary. Yes, not a functional judiciary, and in some cases, the parliamentary system is almost non-existent. So we have that in several monarchies that are trying to evolve. Okay, but because of the realities of these circumstances, they need to be considered as liberal democracies, making the effort in an aspirational context. So we're talking of several monarchies. I'm sure your mind will be drawn to a few now. Several monarchies that are presenting themselves as constitutional monarchies. That is now considered as a form of liberal democracy. So many of them have one or two arms. Definitely, you have the executive, and then a weak judiciary without precedent, without objective standards. So when you try for anything that the executive might prescribe, and then you have very weak legislature, weak consensus building systems. In some cases, the executive, the monarch, could override every of them, but each one of them. But they must all be considered as liberal democracies, as the whole process is aspirational rather than fixed or factual.
One thing I've noticed in the United States is that the legislature, which is supposed to be the strongest branch, and therefore the one that's split into the most individuals representing it, presents itself as the weakest branch, and it um, what's the word? It passes responsibility to the executive and judiciary. So rather than
Mm,
legislating laws, it lets the executive lead the legislative process and only passes what the executive asks for, and it allows the judiciary to override it when in fact it has the responsibility and the powers to write the laws and then to change the laws if the judiciary interprets them in a way it doesn't like.
yes, the United States is a special case. America has its challenges with for now, it's an issue with lobbying and you know interest groups and all that. So the U.S. Congress is also falling into the trap of democratic backsliding.
Hmm.
That is a universe, and as I said earlier, no country is immune to democratic backsliding, and that's the United States' own way of going through it, and that's their challenge now. And the US Congress is now weakened by interest groups, lobbying, and
Forms of
lots of
state
focus on all
capture,
that.
yeah.
Exactly. And it's a huge challenge.
I noticed that all of these different systems are set up in the ways that the people that establish them think that they should function honestly and dependably, but um, any system requires the people and the officials to respect it in order for it to survive. No matter how it's set up, if people don't respect it, it can't sustain itself. And if they do respect it, then it can.
Yes, Yale University professor, that's Thomas Snyder, in his book on freedom, said that freedom is not something we just get in a one-off, political decree that everybody can live by. Freedom is an ongoing engagement. So democracy must always lead to dialogue and discussions. No country is immune to democratic backsliding. That's true. That's true, and must be monitored at all times. That's our essence. That's what we stand for.
And the balance between the government being the derivative of the populace and what the public wants versus the public having to be directed by the government. There's a bit of a shift back and forth in terms of
And
who
yes,
sets the tone and who follows along.
exactly. And then there is also the question of inclusion. Is my voice heard? If my voice is not heard, why should I engage?
Mhm.
Why should I be part of it? So there should be a way to guarantee proactive engagement, inclusion, representation, and continuous improvement. Continuous
Who
improvement. The United States has had 250 years or so, close to 250 years of a balancing act, but there are always times of paradigmatic shifts, major shifts in processes and actions.
who's setting the bar now in terms of inclusion?
That's also another interesting and complicated question. Every country has its own process, but apathy is setting in today. Apathy is setting in, and the advancement of technology creates a completely new threat to democracy because the big tech companies control what we think, what we hear, what we do. And now AI is also emerging. It's also going to open another can of worms that we all have to deal with. So apathy, technology, and the rise of dominant parties. These are the three main threats to
Which
democracy.
countries are leading the way and setting a strong example for inclusion?
Well, as I hope I don't come out as being biased, but Taiwan has like one of the most engaging political systems. Their constitution encourages everybody to participate. Parties that are like that would be considered absolutely ridiculous are represented in their political processes. And Taiwan is now a model for the rest of the world. But Japan has always set the bar, and there are also other states, maybe Switzerland with its top-down reach and spread and all that. And unfortunately, some of the traditional advanced democracies are also going down the rankings, mainly because of populism, presidentialism, and state capture, among other things.
How did Taiwan achieve its high levels of inclusion?
Taiwan has a long history. Has a long history. That China on its own has not been studied as much as it should. But what Taiwan has now is a resurrection of democratic ideals we developed in the 1910s. They couldn't establish them in the early 20th century because of obvious reasons. That's the Japanese invasion, civil wars, infighting, and all that. But when they reconstituted the constitution and ideas in Taiwan after 1947, they were able to set really, really high standards with high level, extremely gifted judges who laid the foundations for a balance of power. So the judiciary was able to balance and steer affairs, although they were a bit, passive. They weren't openly seen as challenging the executive through the 1940s to the end of the Cold War. The judiciary of Taiwan balanced the political affairs and laid the foundations. They sowed the seeds that sprouted as today's, extremely strong democracy that Taiwan has. So it's been a long journey, actually.
Hmm. No, they have a high level of participation in elections.
Very, very, very high. So many regulations, so many standards, and so many requirements. It's Taiwan needs its own separate interview. And I keep learning every day. I keep uncovering new things. And the story of Taiwan and China, as it has evolved over the dynasties till now, need to be taken seriously.
Right.
Yes,
All right. Well, it's nice to know that there are examples to be followed and that, there's a cause for optimism because if Taiwan can do it, then why can't anybody else?
everybody else should
Yeah.
make the effort. So liberal democracy is mainly aspirational. So we have to keep it as it is and encourage states to rise and move towards attaining the best they can for
Right.
inclusion, participation, and a balanced system that includes free markets and civil liberties.
It's not something that you simply achieve and then it's a done deal. It has to be protected and fought for continually.
It's an ongoing process and requires proactive engagement and also paradigmatic shifts, major shifts that that integrate new ideas into the democratic system. So that's about it.
All right, great. Well, thanks for taking the time today to discuss the Olam research and liberal and illiberal democracies around the world. I hope you can join us again soon.
And thank you to Turner Consulting for all your efforts and all the examples you are setting in this sector and in this trade, international affairs, governance, and management. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks very much, Sam. We'll speak soon.
Okay.